Welcome to Her Remarkable History. Remember, to support our channel, please subscribe. Catherine de' Medici, the Serpent Queen. Now, Catherine de' Medici is possibly one queen that many in today's society are not quite familiar with, perhaps due to the fact she falls more into European history. But if we look closely at her life, we can see that she was in fact a chess piece in the early life and first marriage of Mary Queen of Scots to Catherine's son, Francis II. Now, Catherine was brutal and calculating, and history has often considered her to be one of the most powerful women in France during the 16th century. Her story is fascinating and full of ups and downs. Catherine was dubbed the Orphan of Florence because she suffered so much loss during her childhood, but her life turned around when she married into French royalty and eventually became the Queen of France. Catherine was born in the Republic of Florence on the 13th of April 1519 to Lorenzo de' Medici, Duke of Urbino, and Madeleine de la Tour d'Avrigny. Catherine's father was the ruler of their kingdom, and within 3 weeks of Catherine's birth, her mother died from a violent fever, leaving Catherine with just one parent. But then tragedy struck again when Catherine's father had to defend the region after it was attacked by Francesco Maria, a former Duke of Urbino, who had plotted his revenge during a vulnerable time for Lorenzo's family. But Catherine's father, Lorenzo, sustained injuries in his defence of the town and subsequently died from his wounds in the May of 1519. This left little Catherine all alone in the world, although various family members stepped forward to try and care for her. Catherine found herself being passed from person to person. Initially, Catherine was looked after by her paternal grandmother, Alfonsina Orsina, but when Alfonsina died in 1520, Catherine was left with her aunt, Clarice de' Medici. In the year 1527, the Medicis had now been overthrown by an opposing faction that opposed Guido de' Medici, a man who had been elected by Pope Clement VII in 1523. After this, Catherine found herself alone again, and was then raised in a series of convents until peace could be reached. And she was then summoned by Pope Clement to go and live with him in Rome. Catherine spent the first 14 years of her life being passed from person to person. But once Catherine had gone to live with the Pope, she found that he had arranged for her to marry Henry, the Duke of Orleans, the second son of King Francis I of France. This was in early 1533, and by the 28th of October that year, Catherine and Henry were married. Catherine was just 14 years of age when she married the second son of the King of France, and entering the royal family was a life-changing experience for her. Although appearances may have been deceiving, the marriage that Catherine found herself in was not a happy one. Although after the death of her father-in-law, Catherine found herself as queen consort to France, it was obvious that the affections of her husband lay elsewhere. Catherine found herself as a third wheel in her own marriage. Henry II was profoundly in love with his royal favourite, Diane de Poitiers, who exercised enormous influence over Henry's life. Catherine found herself as one in three, and as a result her union suffered a great amount of gossip through the courtiers that would go as far as to say that the queen must be infertile, because the king had many different illegitimate children with his mistresses. It wasn't until after nearly 10 years of humiliation and sadness that Catherine, with the help of Diane, actually conceived a royal heir. Because Diane was worried that the king would find a younger and more enticing wife to sire an heir, and that she would lose her position and influence at court, Diane made sure that the king would frequent Catherine's bedchamber, because Catherine was no threat to her, even with an heir, because Diane had secured the king's affections and sexual attraction. Catherine and Henry went on to have a total of 10 children, with 7 surviving to adulthood. Catherine's position at court changed in an instant when her husband died in a jousting accident. She found herself acting as an advisor to her son Francis II, Though Henry had allowed her little influence as queen consort, she had previously been made regent by her husband in 1552, whilst Henry was absent at the siege of Metz, and she used this brief political experience under Francis. Francis, however, unfortunately died following a battle with an illness on December 5, 1560, and Catherine then found her then 10-year-old son, Charles IX, becoming King of France. But Catherine also found herself in some difficulty. A regency had been put into place to prevent her from taking control, but in true Catherine de' Medici fashion, she overcame this and became governor of France, ruling alongside Antoine de Bourbon, the King of Navarre. Although Antoine was a prince of the blood, a legitimate male heir to the French throne, and had been declared the official regent, the arrangement was ultimately approved by Parliament. Catherine's political power had grown and developed into something of a powerhouse. Through her sons, Catherine had become the most powerful woman in France, becoming the Queen Mother of France when her son Charles became old enough to rule on his own. Catherine imposed herself on all political and government meetings and used her influence to remain in power. She continued this strategy, though less successfully, with her next youngest son Henry III, who became king upon Charles's death in 1574. The long regency that Catherine had held is often marked by the French Wars of Religion, a war that spun across a period of time where Catholics fought Huguenots, or, if you like, Protestants. There have been many legends where Catherine de' Medici is depicted as a murderer who hated Protestants, but if you delve a little deeper into her story, the reality of it is rather different. You see, Catherine spent a lot of her time trying to broker peace and find compromises between the two branches of religion. Catherine was, of course, a devout Catholic, and she would obviously have preferred that her country was 100% like-minded in the ways of religion. But she also knew the importance of stability and preserving the realm for her dynasty. Catherine had spent months trying to negotiate a marriage between her daughter, Marguerite of Valois, to the Huguenot Henry of Navarre, son of Antoine de Bourbon and Jeanne d'Albret. The marriage was agreed, and the wedding itself was arranged for the 18th of August 1572. It was the days that followed this event, however, that brought one of the bloodiest events of early modern French history. With tensions already high in Paris, an assassination attempt was made on Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, the military and political leader of the Huguenots, and the event sparked days of bloodshed, not just in Paris but all over France. It later became known as the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. Catherine found herself trying to save Coligny, the man who had been targeted by the powerful Catholic Guise family. Catherine sent the royal doctor Ambrosia Parr to treat Coligny. Catherine also opened her doors to any Protestant that needed shelter and refuge from the massacre, including the English ambassador at the time, Sir Francis Walsingham. Traditional beliefs are that this massacre and bloodshed were actually instigated by Catherine. It is suspected that she knew the Guise family would seek revenge for the death of their father, who died at the hands of the Huguenot noble in 1562, but it is extremely unlikely that Catherine would have known that this revenge would lead to the thousands of deaths that followed. Catherine would not have encouraged it either, as instability would not have been an interest for anyone in power, especially Catherine, who had spent her whole career seeking peace and the preservation of her dynasty. Although the finger of blame is firmly pointed towards Catherine, there is not a single shred of evidence to prove that Catherine de' Medici was responsible for the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. Catherine lived until she was 69 years of age and died on the 5th of January 1589. In the September of the previous year, Catherine had begun to feel weak and eventually fell ill with a lung infection. This was at the time when the situation in France was rather dire, and the authority of her favourite son, King Henry III, was being undermined and contested. Henry had to flee Paris in the May of 1588 because it was besieged by the Catholic League led by the Guises, and although Catherine tried to advise her son, he was now at a point where he refused to listen. Catherine's illness had progressed, and her power diminished alongside that of her sons, when, in the December of 1588, Henry III ordered the assassination of his enemies, Henry, Duke of Guise, and Louis, Cardinal of Guise. Catherine was shocked by the horror that she was seeing. She knew that the French people would never forgive such treacherous behaviour from a king, and she knew it would seal her son's fate. Catherine's lung infection spread further, and then, on January 5th, 1589, she took her last breath in her bed at the castle of Blois. The believed cause of Catherine's death is pleurisy. After she died, and partly when she was alive, she became the subject of legend, and a dark one at that. Her reign and those of her sons, partly due to the fact that none were able to put an end to the religious civil war that plagued the country between 1562 and 1598, became the basis of this legend. Catherine's Italian origins were considered to be a problem by courtiers, as did her interest in astrology and astronomy. Catherine believed in the ability to see predictions of the future, and therefore asked astronomers such as Nostradamus for predictions. The population saw this as an interest in the occult, something that Catherine just did not have. But bit by bit, Catherine de' Medici became wrongly betrayed by her detractors, as she became known as the Serpent Queen, for it was believed that she knew how to poison her enemies. Catherine was also seen as heartless, but these attacks on Catherine's character could not be further from the truth. Catherine, like any other ruler, did plot and lie when needed to in order to protect her authority or that of her sons, but she also showed how much she truly cared about the preservation of France, and always tried to find ways to promote peace and reach stability within the borders of her realm. Catherine de' Medici was also a fond collector of art, and during her lifetime she came to acquire many different tapestries, sculptures and rich fabrics, as well as furniture and pottery. Catherine also commissioned from Jean Clouet and his son Francis Clouet. There was also a rich passion for architecture, as Catherine ordered many important renovations of buildings, and she spent a lot of her fortune on the arts. But due to the dark legend that hangs over her, even still today, she has never been recognised as a patron. Catherine de' Medici became a force to be reckoned with, and she made her way from orphan to queen consort to queen mother. And through her marriage to King Henry, she drastically altered French history by producing 3 of the nation's kings. The dynasty of Medici and the affiliated dynasty of Valois did not prevail after Henry III, but Catherine's great-grandchildren did go on to shape late 16th and 17th century politics, making Catherine de' Medici, in many ways, the grandmother of early modern Europe. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.